About 14 months ago, I was, as James was talking about, I was giving the unique opportunity, the privilege of effectively starting a product culture from scratch at Moo. And it was one of the most amazing opportunities that I've ever been handed. It's kind of like if I had my own game of Sims culture, and I got to control all the little bits and pieces and see how things worked. But I actually get to sit down for the first time without any legacy, without any baggage. Moo certainly has a very strong culture, but at the time didn't have a very well-established discipline of product management. So I got to sit down and consider, wow, I actually need to create a culture. To the end of, as Jana was talking about, hopefully you create a culture with the ultimate goal of creating better products. So I needed to think, well, what does a culture, a good product culture, need to include? What are the rituals? What are the ceremonies? What are the common shared history? What's the mythology that you share with people that start, that helps you establish something and helps you scale so that people have an innate understanding of how to make decisions because they're a part of the culture. That's really what culture is about. It's about scaling, making decisions the way that you want people to make them at the company. So I had to sit down and think, really for the first time, because I've been doing product management for 15 or 16 years, I had to consider, okay, what is the end goal here? So I should start by saying that I define product management as a science. I think that we've had lots of debates on this, but I truly think that it is a scientific discipline. It is the pursuit of answering, very simply, although not always very easy, the question, I won't do the jokes about the slides not being on the slide. What are the characteristics of a product or service that would compel our customers to choose our product over another product or an alternative? Very simply put, I think that's what our job is. And I wanted to design a culture that helped achieve that and scale that out as we added more and more people to the company. We've doubled in size since I started at the company. When I started, there were 105 people. Now there are 230. We've grown the product team from 2 people to 8. We've grown our UX team from 1 person to 8. We've grown our engineering team from 20 to 40 people in the last 14 months. And so it was very important that we establish a strong culture that ultimately would help scale the essence and the magic and the great things of Moo as we added all those people so quickly. So I wanted to design a culture that helped achieve this end. Now, as with any scientific pursuit that involves human beings, it is fraught with problems. It is fraught with biases. It is fraught with cognitive biases. Humans are actually, as it turns out, really bad at doing product management. This is the wiki page. If you type in and search on cognitive biases, this is the result that you get back. There are over 400 of them there. I've read them all. It's quite an interesting exercise to walk through, terrifying how many of them you see in yourself. And it occurred to me today, as I was looking at this, that if you turn it sideways, it kind of looks like a graphics equalizer for cognitive dissonance. I just thought, that's what's going on in your heads, all the 400 of those cognitive biases happening at the same time. This is one of my favorites. I don't know if we can read it off the side of the slide, but take a quick read. It's one of the favorites I came up with. How many of you know somebody afflicted with this particular disease? It's a good one. We are, amongst other things, we as human beings, we are pattern-seeking creatures. We crave patterns. We want to make sense of the world. We have specialized brain structures, actually, in our brains to recognize patterns, to recognize cause and effect, to recognize human faces as well. That's why when you look at clouds or a landscape or an abstract painting, you can often see faces in it because your brain wants to see human faces. So we're very much pattern-seeking creatures, and I'm reminded of that every day. I have a 2.5-year-old son, and I'm watching him develop on a daily basis. And it's really fascinating because, in many ways, all of the product managers on my team are very much like my 2.5-year-old son. In more ways than I'd like, actually. I spend a day listening to people whine, and then I go home and I have another person whining at me. No, I'm just kidding. But this pattern seeking is fascinating. So my son, we introduced him to the notion of a duck, things that quack. And I watched as he learned that now everything that either flies or has two legs is a quack, right? So his brain immediately is wanting to categorize things and recognize patterns in the world and make sense of them. So then it was really interesting to introduce then the notion of a dog, right? So the things that woof, and to see what is he going to include when we talk about the woofs. So now we've got a world of divided in, there are only two things in the world, two kinds of things. There are quacks and there are woofs. And quacks either fly or have two legs, and woofs, as you can see, have four legs. And this is how he divides up the world. And it was just fascinating to watch. And it kind of reminded me every day of the flaws, I think, that we have as human beings in trying to do the job that we do. I did this intentionally, an exercise with him where I introduced something that fit neither category. It was a snake. And it was amazing because I watched him kind of stare at, sorry, I forgot my Justin Bieber mic. Stare at this thing for a second and try to fit it in. Is it a quack? Is it a wolf? I'm not sure which of these things it is. And then he just started laughing. And the laughing, like the look on his face was one of joy, right? Because we do as humans have this innate kind of desire to learn and this innate curiosity. He realized that he can't categorize this into a quack or a wolf. And it was amazing because now we'd introduced a third category into his world that he can start dividing into things. So it was really, really fun. It's been amazing, actually, to watch him grow up and look at the parallels between that and, I think, the things that we face as product managers. Now, all of those structures in our brain, all of that pattern recognition is very useful if you are trying to survive out in the wild, to try to keep from being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. You see patterns like, hey, Tony ate those red berries, and Tony died. So I'm just going to remember that little tidbit of information and remind myself and my family not to eat the red berries in the future. And you may go so far as to not eat anything that's red at all, right? Because that's how our brains work. And again, like I said, that's really useful when trying to survive out in the wild. Turns out it's really, really terrible for trying to do product management. And these are the innate structures and the innate cognitive biases that we have to contend with when we make decisions every day. Now, we've built lots of systems, lots of memes and lots of things that are very in vogue right now to mitigate the problem of product managers making bad decisions. So there's lean, everything's lean. And everything's minimum viable product, although somebody on my team actually achieved what I called recently the maximum possible product. And we had to go back and divide that up into more minimum viable products. But we have all these systems out there to basically kind of prevent the damage that you can do for making really bad decisions as a product manager. So as a discipline, I give us all a fail right now, because I think we're not good at this. It's not as rigorous as other disciplines out there. I think we can do a lot better. We should do a lot better. We shouldn't have to have books and speakers and conferences about how to, make little tiny changes so that we don't, go too far in the wrong direction. I think we can do much better than that. Not to say that there isn't a place for those things, but I do think that those are largely designed to mitigate the impact of people responsible for making business decisions, you people, from bad decisions. I think those things are about. So I give us a fail. I would like to come back in a year and give us a better grade, but we'll see how we do. And actually, I think that's why I wanted to thank the guys at Product Tank, because I think that they're helping the community do that. So I wanted to talk about the 2 or 3 things that I've seen in terms of these cognitive biases, these kind of innate problems we have as human beings in making decisions, that I wanted to build a culture to help inoculate us against, to use your metaphor, right? And to try and combat, right? So what are the rituals? What are the ceremonies? What is the shared history that I wanted to create and that we wanted to create as a team in order to avoid these things? And the most insidious of these things is something that we call the tyranny of inertia. The tyranny of inertia is when asked, why did we do that? The answer is, well, that's because that's the way we've always done it. And as humans, again, we have a natural tendency towards homeostasis, right? Human beings, human systems all try to avoid change. When change happens, they do their best to inoculate themselves against it and to try and prevent it. The brain is actually designed to do this. It's designed to use as little energy as possible to remember things, to identify patterns, and to make decisions. The brain is exceptionally lazy. It's actually extremely efficient at using energy. And so it does its best to not pay attention to as much as it possibly can. So as humans, we very rarely go back, especially as the company's older. Moo's actually 8 years old. We go back and we actually question, why did we do that? I think this is one of the things that plagues us as product managers. That leads us to make really bad decisions. And so we call it the tyranny of inertia. So we talked about what are the rituals and the ceremonies and things like that we can do to prevent us or help us to not commit this crime as often as we otherwise might. So the first thing, actually I'll give you an example first of what I mean, a Moo example of the tyranny of inertia. So when I got to Moo, we were about to launch a product, note cards. We do, amongst other things, professional stationery. And the pack size, right, the number of units in a pack that we sold was 60. And so I went and found the product manager and I said, why 60? Just out of curiosity, like, why is that the right number of pack size that we should order? Because we make packaging specifically for the pack size, and so it's a bit of an investment for us. And he said, don't really know. And so I said, well, I'd really like to know why 60 is the right number for the pack size for this product. So we went off and he did some work, and he came back the next day and he said, 60 is 3 times 20. And I said, it is indeed. But why does that help me understand why we've chosen 60 as the pack size for this new product? And he said, I don't know, but I'll go find out. So he went back and did some more work and math. And he came back the next day and he said, I don't know why 60 is the right number, why we chose 60 as the pack size. So I spent weeks trying to figure out why 60, right? And I ended up discovering the reason just purely by accident. I was on our shop floor. We have a printing facility in our building. I was on our shop floor and I was watching the business cards come out of the printer. And the number of business cards that we can fit on a single sheet of paper in our printer is 20. And it occurred to me that the number, the fundamental unit or number that we build everything off of is 20. Not because that's the number of postcards we can get on a sheet of paper, but because we've always done pack sizes in units of 20. Because of business cards, because of the size of a sheet of paper. So the size of a sheet of paper determined for a completely different product in a completely different use case, a completely different price point, the number that went in a package. And to me, this is the most scary, terrifying, insidious thing that we face as product managers. And the older that you get, the more of this baggage that you have. So the tyranny of inertia. So how do we, what have we done to inoculate ourselves against that? Well, one, we've established a ritual, right, which is we have a weekly meeting, and you cannot sit in the same seat 2 weeks in a row. So everyone comes in 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and if you sit in the same seat that you sat in last week, you are fined 5 pounds. And everyone comes in, and you can see them come in, and they try to remember, where did I sit last week? And other people are saying, did you sit there last week? And we just said, try to remember why it's just a little reminder. Don't always do the same thing, because I'm sure you guys all go and sit in the same seat, in the same conference room, for the same meeting all the time. And it's a little tiny thing that we wanted to do as a little ritual to remind ourselves to ask the question, why are we doing these things? We also do a bunch of things to try to just change the perspective of the team. We do field trips. We do swaps where someone on our team will sit next to an engineer all day. And we have engineers come and sit with product. We just try to get a different perspective. But I think one of the most insidious things that we have to contend with is the tyranny of inertia. And it's very simply about creating a culture, a ceremony, a ritual to make sure that people always ask the question, why are we doing this? And are we doing it for the right reasons? So this is specific to Moo. I think the thing that I want you guys to take from this is think about rituals, think about ceremonies, think about things that you can do, little things, right, that remind you to, amongst other things, question why are we doing this? There are many examples of this out in culture. I think my favorite is Buddhist monks, very early on, used to put a stone in their shoe to remind them every time they felt it when they were walking to be present and mindful. And then several generations later, what you found was that you had young monks who would put a stone in their shoe and walk around, and you'd ask them, why do you have a stone in your shoe? And they said, well, because we're a Buddhist monk and we put stones in our shoes. And if the Buddhists, come on, if they struggle with it, we're all gonna struggle with it. We want to design little bits and pieces, little things to remind ourselves to ask the question, why are we doing this? And the goal here is really to have what, again, I think the Zen Buddhists would call the beginner's mind, right? Look at things from a fresh perspective. Do not bring baggage to a discussion, and understand what your biases are. This is a picture of my son, by the way, the quack and wolf guy. And then I think the last thing I do, and I just wanted to share this because I think it's a very practical thing that's been the most useful thing I think I've discovered over the last couple of years, is something I called scheduled spontaneity, which is I literally every quarter sit down and pick random days to put in my calendar a reminder to question something. So if you look at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday and on Friday, I pick something, anything from an email, an assumption we made in a business case, and I go and find that person, or I walk into a meeting, and with the determination of just saying, what are our assumptions here? Like, are they good assumptions? Are they valid assumptions? So scheduled spontaneity, if you take one thing away, hopefully you're all very proactive about your time management. You can tell I am. I'm quite obsessive about it. Is scheduled spontaneity. It's really hard to remember because we tend towards homeostasis. It's hard to remember to do these things, right? Because we avoid it. We don't like change. So factor it into your day. So the second thing that I want to talk about is propinquity. This is one of my favorite words to say. It's fun to say, propinquity. And it is a term from social science, which means like is attracted to like, right? And the simplest example you may have all heard is that in university, the people whose rooms are nearest the toilet inevitably become the most popular people because they know everybody. Everyone eventually has to go to the toilet, and so they all meet, everyone in the building. But this is really about how close are you to your customer in terms of your profile? And this is so important to remember, and it's another one of those really, really insidious things that we have to contend with, because we often make the mistake that the people we're designing our products for want the same things that we do. And that's fine when you're a lot like your customer. If you're a gamer and you're designing games for other gamers, that's great, right? But, and I think this kind of lesson was seared in my brain when at the tender age of 22 years old, I was the product manager for a technology, an as yet to be announced technology from Microsoft called XML. And I was working on a product called Host Integration Server, which is about connecting old mainframe kind of AS400 machines up to modern technologies. And I thought, we're going to use XML and SOAP and web services, and these guys are going to absolutely love the new features of this product. The average age of the people working on the product was 23 years old. The average age of the user was 55 years old. And we came out with all these amazing new XML-based protocols for connecting to an AS400 to a website and everything else. And we launched the product, and it was an absolute failure. We talked to customers, they absolutely hated it. And I went so far as one customer said, have you ever seen an AS400? And I had to admit that I had not actually seen an AS400 machine ever, and I was the product manager for the product. You've seen one, James? Have you really? They're big and ugly. I've seen one since, but when I was the product manager for the product, I had never seen one. So this is near and dear to my heart. I still get queasy and embarrassed when I think about that meeting, and I've forever remembered it. So the further you are from your customer, the more aware you have to be of the differences. And this is really important for us at Moo, right? Because we're based in London. We're mostly British people. And yet 65% of our business is in the United States. So this, that's a minor difference, but business cards are a different size in the United States. And the ceremony and the rituals around business cards are different enough that it's an important distinction. Certainly the demographics and everything else, price sensitivity, those things are all different in the States than they are in the UK. So we have to remember about propinquity. And again, this is really, how do we build culture, like rituals and ceremonies, to remember to ask the question, who actually is our customer? And so we do a couple of things. One thing is, I only control 2 hours a week for the product management team. The team meeting is 1 hour, and then the other hour is that they must do one of three things. They must sit with a customer service agent on the phones or on chat for an hour. They must go and work in the Moo shop, just over in the Box Park, for an hour and actually deal with customers. Or they have to go out to a coffee shop or whatever and talk to customers and ask them how they use business cards, how do they use business stationery. And this is mandated. They have to write a little write-up of it to make sure that they do it. Now, the interesting thing here is that the tyranny of inertia snuck in here as well, which is people started to do this and just go through the motions. They'd write up their thing. They wouldn't get anything out of it. We stopped really responding and making changes based on the feedback. So I actually ultimately had to stop it and kind of try to think of different ways to keep people in touch with who our customers are, because they just got numb to this. They sought homeostasis, and they got numb to this little ritual. I think it's one of the big learnings, is that you have to constantly be changing. Planned spontaneity, you have to constantly be changing the rituals. But it's really about just getting people to ask that question consistently. The last thing that I'll talk about is once you get out there and talk to customers, I'm sure you've all experienced this, you come back from a conference and you're all energized because you just talked to a bunch of customers and you know exactly what you should do with your product now because you talked to customers. And the problem is that this approach is also fraught with danger. The sample size of one, right? You're familiar with the term. And you come back and you're so excited and you've spent this time with customers and you generalize everything. You forget about propinquity. You forget about the tyranny of inertia, all these things, and you say, I know exactly what we're supposed to do. So again, when I started at Moo, the team came to me and they said, we know what to do. We know what our product plan is. I said, great. I said, how do you know what you do? And they said, well, we did a survey. I said, I love surveys. Tell me about your survey. They said, okay, we polled all of Moo's Facebook followers and asked them what products we should build. And I said, great start. I said, but let me understand what you're saying. So we're trying to learn about the behavior, wants, and needs of people who purchase business cards, right? They said, yes. I said, excellent. I said, you've now narrowed that down to people who only purchase it online, correct? Yep. We have done that because they're on Facebook and they're Moo customers. They have to have done it online. We don't sell products offline, or we didn't at the time. I said, excellent. So you've taken that subset and you've further narrowed it down to people who have purchased online but who are our customers, right? It's actually a fairly fragmented and large industry, so that's actually not to scale. It'd be quite smaller bubble if it were. So furthermore, we've talked to people who follow Moo on Facebook. And they said, and they just started to look a little bit more glum and glum as I pursued this, and I said, and the final nail in the coffin is that you've actually talked to people who purchase business cards online, who are our customers, follow us on Facebook, and have the time to fill out a survey. And you are generalizing those answers to represent that entire bubble of people. And I said, I think we need another survey. And it's a funny example, right? And you've all done it, like you know you have. And that's the reason why I can bring it up. And the team loves it, and we laugh about it now. But it's just a great example of, in the best of companies with the best of intentions, we really make terrible decisions for all these very insidious reasons. And one of the easiest ways to combat it is to try to build a culture to prevent it. What are the little rituals and ceremonies and things that you do that become natural to everybody that are constantly questioning these things? So in this case, simply ask, what's the data that we're basing these questions on, basing these decisions on? And is it valid, and is it truly representative of our customer base? Because in most cases, it's not. So we've introduced, as a part of our culture, something that we call signals. It's not something we coined. I used to work in the search business at Microsoft, and we talk about signals helping to refine search results. But these are kind of automated, repeatable, quantifiable market data coming into your company that you can help drive your decisions off of. Now, not the only thing, but they're part of the solution. This is one I saw at Gatwick the other day. I constantly am on the lookout for these kinds of things, right? So this is after you walk through security. And I thought, this is so cool. How wide is your smile right now, having just gone through security? And my smile was very wide because of this thing, not because of my experience with security, but I thought, this thing's awesome. Now, you wouldn't want to make a decision about how to do security at Gatwick based on people's answers to this thing. But it can't hurt to have the data, right? As one signal amongst many that helps you drive your decisions. I think the goal is to triangulate amongst many pieces of data, right? So that it also it serves as a checks and balance for the data that you have. So if 6 data sources say one thing and a 7th says another thing, then you have to say, why is that one different? Is that actually a bad data source? Is it actually telling us something of use? But we've automated this so that we have several data sources coming in at all times. So we tag all customer service tickets with the nature of the customer problem. We have NPS, a Net Promoter Score. We have that survey that we send out to customers. We have that information coming in. We have our Facebook follower surveys that we have. And we have other surveys, slightly more rigorous in nature, that we do. And we have a bunch of both qualitative and quantitative signals coming in all the time. And so it's become fascinating because I get to sit back now and watch as new people who I didn't hire, who started in the last couple of months, say, which signals is that decision based on? Where are those signals coming from, right? So it is actually the test of, is this becoming a part of the culture? Does it live on after multiple generations in this case? And I define that in this context as somebody who I didn't hire, and who I didn't explain this to, and who hasn't been there very long, but they're starting to do these things. And I've heard people who have been there for a couple of months saying, the tyranny of inertia, or why are we doing that, or is this actually our customer? I think that's the real test of whether or not these things are actually impacting the culture in your company. So triangulating, I think having multiple data sources, in addition to talking to customers and all those other things, are the things that I think are key in terms of decision making when it comes to that sort of thing. So I think the key takeaways here, and I didn't do a nice, neat summary slide, are because I don't want to be overly prescriptive. I think this is unique to each company. You need to decide what makes sense. Rituals, ceremonies, little things, big things, a shared history, stories, archetypes, your mythology. What are the things that you're going to create to tackle specific problems? In my mind, the biggest problems product management have are the 3 I talked about. So the tyranny of inertia, propinquity, and making, not understanding what your data is or whether or not it's valid. But in your company or in your case or in your philosophy on product management, it might be different. But it was really fascinating to identify these things and intentionally make little ceremonies and rituals and things. And you have to keep doing it. You have to be consistent. Like Tim said, you have to stick with it, right? Because eventually it'll take hold and it'll catch on and it'll get a life of its own. And that is the story, the brief story so far of creating a new product culture at Moo. Very quickly, if you're interested in further reading on anything that I've talked about, email me with that subject line. You'll get an automated response of about a dozen books that I really recommend to anybody who's getting into product management. I don't make any money. I don't have any affiliates with it. I just think they're great books. And that's it. Thank you guys very much.